Sarah Martinez walked into the military recruitment office on a humid Tuesday morning in Phoenix, Arizona. She was 22 years old, fresh out of college with a degree in engineering that felt worthless in her hands. The job market was tough and her family needed money. Her younger brother Miguel was starting college and her mother worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. The recruitment office smelled like coffee and old leather chairs. Posters of helicopters and fighter jets covered the walls. Sarah had always been fascinated by aircraft, spending hours as a child watching planes fly overhead from her backyard. Her father had been a mechanic at a small airport before he died in a car accident when she was 16. He used to tell her stories about the pilots he met, how they seemed to touch the sky with their bare hands. "I want to fly," Sarah told Sergeant Rodriguez, the recruiter sitting across from her. He was a stocky man with kind eyes who reminded her of her uncle. Rodriguez looked at her small frame and quiet demeanor. Sarah was barely 5 feet tall with long black hair that she kept in a simple ponytail. She wore a plain white t-shirt and jeans that had seen better days. "Flying is competitive," Rodriguez said gently. "Have you considered other positions? We have great opportunities in communications, logistics, supply chain management." He slid several brochures across the desk, each showing smiling soldiers in various non-combat roles. Sarah shook her head firmly. "I want to be a pilot. My father always said I had steady hands and a sharp mind. He taught me about engines and how things work in the air." She had spent countless weekends in her father's garage, learning about hydraulics, fuel systems, and the delicate balance that keeps aircraft airborne. Rodriguez studied her application again. Her test scores were impressive, particularly in mathematics and spatial reasoning. Her college grades showed consistent excellence in mechanical engineering courses. But the military was changing slowly, and combat aviation remained largely male-dominated. "The physical requirements are intense," Rodriguez warned. "You'll compete against candidates who have been preparing for years. Many are former athletes, some have private pilot licenses already." He had seen many hopeful recruits walk through his door, but few with Sarah's quiet determination. Sarah had expected this conversation. She had researched everything about military aviation, from the grueling training programs to the psychological evaluations. She knew the statistics about women in combat roles, the challenges they faced, and the barriers they had to break through. "I can handle it," she said simply. "I've been working construction jobs since I was 18 to help support my family. I wake up at 5 every morning to run before work. I've been preparing for this my whole life, even when I didn't know it." Rodriguez saw something in her eyes that reminded him of the best pilots he had known during his own service. There was a calmness there, a focus that couldn't be taught or faked. He had learned to recognize the difference between confidence and arrogance, between determination and desperation. "All right," he said, pulling out the official paperwork. "But I want you to understand what you're signing up for. Basic training is just the beginning. If you make it through that, you'll face months of intensive flight training. The washout rate is high, especially for helicopter pilots. Apache training is the most demanding program we offer." Sarah's eyes lit up when he mentioned the Apache helicopter. She had read about these aircraft, the most advanced attack helicopters in the world. They required exceptional skill, split-second decision-making, and the ability to operate complex weapon systems while flying in dangerous conditions. "The Apache program is what I want," she said without hesitation. "I know it's difficult. I know most people don't make it. But I'm not most people." Rodriguez completed her paperwork and scheduled her for medical and psychological evaluations. As Sarah prepared to leave, he offered one final piece of advice. "Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong there. I've seen big, tough guys wash out in the first week, and I've seen quiet people like you surprise everyone. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and remember why you're doing this." Walking out of the recruitment office, Sarah felt the Arizona sun on her face and looked up at the cloudless sky. Somewhere up there was her future if she was strong enough to reach it. She thought about her father, about the stories he told her about flying, about the freedom and responsibility that came with controlling powerful machines in the air. That evening, Sarah called her mother to share the news. Maria Martinez cried on the phone, partly from pride and partly from fear. She had already lost her husband. The thought of losing her daughter to military service terrified her, but she had raised Sarah to be strong and independent, and she knew better than to try to change her daughter's mind. "Your father would be proud," Maria said through her tears. He always said you were meant for something special. Just promise me you'll be careful, Sarah promised, though they both knew the nature of military service made such promises difficult to keep. That night, she lay in bed planning her training routine, researching nutrition for peak physical performance, and dreaming of the day she would pilot an Apache helicopter. She had no idea that this decision would lead her on a journey that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, about leadership and about what it meant to serve her country. The quiet young woman from Phoenix was about to become someone she couldn't yet imagine, forged by trials that would test every aspect of her character and ability. Basic training at Fort Benning was everything Sarah had expected and worse. The Georgia heat was suffocating, and Drill Sergeant Williams seemed to take personal pleasure in making her life miserable. He was a mountain of a man who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and had little patience for what he called college kids playing soldier. "Martinez," Williams would shout across the training ground. "You think this is summer camp? Drop and give me 50. Sarah would comply without complaint, her face expressionless as she completed each push-up with perfect form. Her fellow recruits began to notice that she never broke, never cried, never showed the fear that sometimes flickered across their own faces. The physical training was brutal. 5-mile runs in full gear, obstacle courses that left recruits bloody and exhausted, combat simulations that pushed them to their mental limits. Sarah's small frame worked against her in some exercises, but she compensated with technique and an almost supernatural endurance that surprised her instructors. "Where does she come from?" Recruit Johnson asked during a rare break. Johnson was a former college football player who towered over Sarah but found himself struggling to keep up with her during long runs. "She's like a machine." Private Chen, a quiet young man from California, had been watching Sarah carefully. "My grandfather was in Vietnam," he said. "He told me about people like her. They don't break because they've already been broken and put themselves back together stronger." Chen was more perceptive than he knew. Sarah carried the weight of her father's death, her family's financial struggles, and years of being underestimated because of her size and gender. These experiences had forged a mental toughness that no amount of military training could replicate. The real test came during the combat simulation exercises. Recruits were divided into teams and given complex missions that required leadership, strategy, and quick thinking under pressure. Sarah found herself naturally falling into leadership roles, not because she sought them, but because others began looking to her for guidance during chaotic situations. During one particularly difficult exercise, Sarah's team was tasked with rescuing hostages from a mock enemy compound. The scenario was designed to be nearly impossible, with multiple variables and time pressure that typically cause teams to fall apart. Most teams approach the problem with brute force, rushing in with overwhelming firepower. Sarah studied the situation differently. She spent precious minutes observing the compound, noting guard patterns, identifying weaknesses in the enemy's setup. Her teammates grew impatient, wanting to charge forward, but she held them back. "We wait," she said calmly. "Watch the guards. They rotate every 12 minutes. There's a gap on the east side for exactly 90 seconds. When the moment came, Sarah's team moved like a perfectly synchronized unit. They infiltrated the compound, neutralized the guards silently, and extracted the hostages without firing a single shot. The exercise instructors were stunned. In 3 years of running this simulation, no team had achieved a perfect score. Drill Sergeant Williams pulled Sarah aside after the exercise. His usual harsh demeanor was replaced by something approaching respect. "I've seen a lot of recruits come through here, Martinez. Most of them are either trying to prove something or running from something. You're different. You're here because this is where you belong." Word of Sarah's performance began to spread among the instructors. Captain Thompson, who oversaw the aviation track candidates, made a special trip to observe her during training. He watched her lead another team through a complex communications exercise, noting how she listened to input from every team member before making decisions, how she remained calm when equipment malfunctioned, how she took responsibility for failures without passing blame to others. "She's officer material," Thompson told Williams after the observation. "Has she expressed interest in commissioning?" Williams shook his head. "She wants to fly. Specifically, she wants Apache training. I've never seen anyone more focused on a single goal." Thompson nodded thoughtfully. The Apache program was elite, accepting only the most exceptional candidates. But Sarah's combination of technical knowledge, leadership ability, and unshakable composure under pressure made her exactly the type of pilot the program needed. As basic training neared its end, Sarah received news that both thrilled and terrified her. She had been accepted into the preliminary Apache training program at Fort Rucker, Alabama. Only 30 candidates had been selected from thousands of applicants nationwide. The night before graduation, Sarah sat outside the barracks looking at the stars. Her fellow recruits had organized an informal celebration, but she preferred the quiet moment to reflect on how much had changed since that day in the recruitment office. Recruit Chen joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. "Nervous about flying school?" he asked. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. "Excited," she corrected. "I've been dreaming about this since I was a kid. My father used to tell me that flying was the closest thing to freedom a person could experience." "What if you don't make it?" Chen asked gently. "I heard the washout rate is over 60%. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, sipping the bitter coffee and watching a plane blink across the night sky. "Then I'll try again," she said simply. "And again after that. Some people are meant to do certain things, Chen. This is what I'm meant to do." Chen studied her profile in the dim light from the barracks windows. There was something different about Sarah Martinez, something that set her apart from every other recruit he had met. She didn't carry herself like someone trying to prove a point or break barriers. She moved through the world with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly where she belonged. The graduation ceremony was a blur of proud families, speeches about service and sacrifice, and the formal recognition of their transformation from civilians to soldiers. Sarah's mother and brother made the trip from Phoenix, tears streaming down their faces as they watched her receive her assignment orders. "Fort Rucker," Miguel read over her shoulder. "Apache helicopter training. Sarah, do you realize how incredible this is?" Sarah hugged her family tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her mother's perfume and feeling Miguel's pride radiating through his embrace. She was ready for the next phase of her journey, though she had no idea that the challenges ahead would test not just her flying skills, but her ability to lead others through situations where failure meant death. Fort Rucker, Alabama was known as the home of Army aviation, and Sarah felt the weight of that legacy the moment she stepped onto the base. Apache helicopters thundered overhead in training formations, their distinctive shapes cutting through the humid southern air like mechanical birds of prey. The Apache training program was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. The aircraft itself was a marvel of engineering complexity, equipped with advanced targeting systems, multiple weapon platforms, and flight controls that required extraordinary coordination between pilot and co-pilot gunner. Each helicopter cost $35 million, and the military invested that amount again in training each crew. Chief Warrant Officer Reynolds, the head instructor, addressed the 30 candidates on their first day. He was a lean man with graying hair and eyes that had seen combat in 3 different conflicts. "Look around you," he said. "By Christmas, half of you will be gone. By graduation, only 10 or 12 will remain. This isn't personal. The Apache demands perfection because the soldiers depending on you deserve nothing less." The training began with ground school, hours of studying hydraulic systems, engine specifications, weapons capabilities, and emergency procedures. Sarah absorbed everything with the hunger of someone who had waited her entire life for this opportunity. While other candidates struggled with the technical complexity, she found herself helping classmates understand concepts that came naturally to her. Lieutenant Harrison, a former Navy pilot transitioning to Army aviation, sat beside Sarah during most classes. He was tall, confident, and had years of flight experience that Sarah envied. But he struggled with the Apache's unique systems and found himself increasingly relying on Sarah's explanations. "How do you understand this stuff so easily?" Harrison asked after a particularly difficult lesson on the targeting system. "I've been flying for 5 years, and this is like learning a completely new language." Sarah looked up from her notes where she had been sketching diagrams to help visualize the system connections. "My father was a mechanic," she said simply. "He taught me that every machine has a logic to it. Once you understand what the designers were trying to accomplish, the complexity becomes clearer." The first time Sarah climbed into an Apache cockpit for actual flight training, She felt a rush of emotion that surprised her. The pilot sat in the rear seat, elevated above the co-pilot gunner in front. The canopy provided a panoramic view that made her feel suspended in space. Every surface was covered with switches, displays, and controls that would soon become as familiar as her own hands. Instructor Pilot Major Williams strapped into the front seat and began the pre-flight checklist. "Today we're just going to hover," he said through the intercom. "I want you to get a feel for the controls. The Apache is different from anything you've flown before. She's sensitive, powerful, and unforgiving of mistakes." When Sarah engaged the collective and felt the helicopter respond to her touch, something clicked into place that she had been searching for her entire life. The Apache wasn't just a machine. It was an extension of her will, a tool that amplified her capabilities beyond anything she had imagined possible. "Good," Williams said, as Sarah maintained a steady hover despite the swirling wind. "You've got natural feel for it. Some pilots fight the aircraft their entire careers. You're working with it." Flight training intensified rapidly. Sarah learned to navigate at low altitude through simulated combat zones, coordinate with ground troops, and operate the sophisticated targeting systems while maintaining control of the aircraft. The multitasking required was extraordinary, but she approached each challenge with the same methodical determination that had carried her through basic training. The weapons training was where some candidates finally broke. Learning to engage targets with precision while flying an aircraft in combat conditions required a mental compartmentalization that not everyone could achieve. Sarah watched several talented pilots wash out during this phase, overwhelmed by the responsibility of wielding such destructive power. During one training mission, Sarah was paired with candidate Torres, a former Marine who had specifically requested Apache training after losing friends to enemy fire that could have been prevented by effective air support. Torres was skilled but aggressive, eager to engage targets quickly rather than methodically. Their mission was to provide close air support for a simulated ground operation. Enemy targets were scattered throughout a mock village, mixed with civilian structures that absolutely could not be damaged. One mistake could mean civilian casualties in a real scenario. Torres identified the first target and immediately called for weapons release. Sarah, serving as pilot in command for this mission, studied the target through her display. Something wasn't right about the identification. "Wait," Sarah said calmly. "Check your target designation again." "It's confirmed," Torres replied impatiently. "I have clear visual on enemy personnel." Sarah took control of the targeting system and examined the scene more carefully. What Torres had identified as enemy soldiers were actually training mannequins positioned deliberately to test their judgment. The real target was partially concealed 50 meters to the east. "Negative on that target," Sarah said. "Real target is grid reference 2473. Confirm before engagement." Torres checked his instruments again and realized his error. In a real combat situation, his eagerness could have resulted in civilian casualties. After the mission, he approached Sarah with genuine gratitude. "You saved me from a major mistake," he said. "How did you see what I missed?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "My father taught me to look at what's not there as much as what is there. The target you identified was too obvious, too easy. Real enemies don't usually position themselves that conveniently." Word of Sarah's judgment and flying ability began to spread among the instructors. She consistently scored at the top of her class in both technical knowledge and practical application. More importantly, she demonstrated the kind of steady leadership that the Apache program needed in its pilots. As the program continued, Sarah found herself naturally becoming a leader among the remaining candidates. When classmates struggled with difficult concepts, they came to her for help. When training missions went wrong, others looked to her for solutions. She never sought these leadership roles, but she accepted them with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else. By the halfway point of training, the original 30 candidates had been reduced to 15. Sarah remained at the top of her class, but she knew the most challenging phase was still ahead. Soon they would face combat simulation exercises that would test not just their flying skills, but their ability to make life-and-death decisions under extreme pressure. The advanced combat simulation phase of Apache training took place in Nevada, where the military had created realistic battlefields in the desert. Sarah and the 11 remaining candidates faced scenarios designed to replicate the chaos and pressure of actual combat operations. The first major test was a rescue mission. A downed pilot was trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostile forces and anti-aircraft weapons. 4 Apache helicopters would participate in the operation, and someone needed to coordinate the entire mission while flying their own aircraft and managing weapon systems. Major Williams gathered the candidates in the briefing room. "This exercise has a 90% failure rate," he announced. "Most teams either lose the rescue target, suffer aircraft losses, or both. We need someone to serve as mission commander. Any volunteers?" The room fell silent. Mission commander meant taking responsibility for the lives of everyone involved, both in the aircraft and on the ground. A single mistake could result in multiple casualties, even in simulation. Sarah raised her hand without hesitation. "I'll do it." Williams studied her carefully. Sarah had consistently performed well, but mission command required different skills than individual piloting. "This isn't about flying ability, Martinez. You'll be making tactical decisions for 4 aircraft while operating in a hostile environment. Are you certain you're ready for that responsibility?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied simply. She had been preparing for this moment without realizing it, through every leadership challenge in basic training, every complex mission during flight school. The mission briefing was complex. Enemy forces controlled a valley where the downed pilot was hiding. Surface-to-air missile sites protected the area, and enemy helicopters were conducting search patterns. The rescue had to be completed before enemy ground forces located the pilot. Sarah studied the intelligence reports and terrain maps with intense concentration. Her fellow pilots watched as she identified patterns and weaknesses in the enemy positions that others had missed. She began developing a plan that was audacious in its simplicity. "We're going to split into 2 elements," Sarah explained to her team. "Alpha Flight will engage the SAM sites from the north, drawing their attention and fire. Bravo Flight will approach from the south through this canyon. I'll coordinate both elements while flying lead in Alpha Flight." Candidate Chen, who had become Sarah's closest friend during training, raised a concern. "That puts you in the most dangerous position." "Mission commanders usually stay back to maintain overall situational awareness." Sarah shook her head. "The team needs to see their commander sharing the risk. Besides, I can coordinate better if I'm directly engaged with the primary threat." When the mission launched, Sarah's Apache lifted off into the Nevada dawn with 3 other helicopters following in formation. The weight of command felt different from anything she had experienced before. Every decision she made would affect the lives of 7 other crew members, plus the downed pilot they were trying to save. The approach to the target area was tense. Sarah monitored multiple radio frequencies while flying her aircraft through challenging terrain. She tracked the positions of all friendly forces, monitored intelligence updates about enemy movements, and calculated timing for the coordinated attack. "Alpha Flight, we're approaching the engagement zone," Sarah transmitted. "Remember, our job is to draw fire and suppress the SAM sites. Make yourselves visible, but stay mobile. Bravo Flight, begin your approach through Canyon 7. The simulation erupted into chaos as Sarah's element engaged the enemy positions. Surface-to-air missiles streaked through the air while Sarah coordinated return fire and maneuvered her aircraft to avoid incoming threats. Through it all, she maintained constant communication with both elements, adjusting the plan as conditions changed. "SAM Site 2 is still active," reported Chen from the aircraft beside her. "They're tracking Bravo Flight." Sarah quickly analyzed the situation. The rescue element would be shot down if the missile site wasn't neutralized immediately, but engaging it would expose her aircraft to fire from multiple directions. "Chen, take lead of Alpha Flight," Sarah ordered. "Continue suppressing the northern positions. I'm going after SAM Site 2. Before anyone could object, Sarah broke formation and dove toward the enemy position. Her co-pilot gunner, Warrant Officer Jackson, worked frantically to lock onto the target while Sarah maneuvered through intense anti-aircraft fire. "Missile launched," Jackson called out as a surface-to-air missile headed directly toward them. Sarah executed a sharp turn that pushed both crew members to the limits of their physical endurance, deploying countermeasures while maintaining her attack run. The missile missed by mere feet as Jackson's Hellfire missile destroyed the SAM site in a spectacular explosion. "Bravo Flight, you're clear for pickup," Sarah transmitted, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. The rescue was completed successfully with no casualties. As the helicopters returned to base, the other pilots realized they had witnessed something extraordinary. Sarah had not only coordinated a complex mission under extreme pressure, but had personally taken the greatest risk to ensure mission success. Instructor Williams was waiting when they landed. That was textbook mission command, he told Sarah. You adapted to changing conditions, prioritized mission objectives, and led from the front. But more importantly, you brought everyone home. That evening, the remaining candidates gathered to debrief the mission. For the first time since training began, they didn't discuss technical procedures or tactical errors. Instead, they talked about leadership, about the weight of command, and about the kind of person who volunteers to carry that burden. I've never seen anything like that, Torres said. When you broke formation to take out that SAM site, I thought you were crazy, but you had calculated the risk perfectly. Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking out at the Nevada desert where they had just completed one of the most challenging exercises in military aviation training. My father once told me that some people are meant to carry responsibility for others. I think this is what he meant. As word of Sarah's performance spread among the instructors, a discussion began about her future assignment after graduation. The military was forming new Apache squadrons to meet increasing operational demands, and they needed experienced pilots who could serve as leaders. Colonel Morrison, the base commander, reviewed Sarah's training records with growing interest. Her scores were exceptional, but more importantly, she had demonstrated the kind of mature judgment and natural leadership that couldn't be taught. She's ready for command responsibilities immediately after graduation, Morrison told his staff. I want her considered for squadron leadership positions. Sarah remained focused on completing her training, unaware that decisions were being made about her future that would test her capabilities in ways that no simulation could prepare her for. The quiet young woman from Phoenix was about to become one of the youngest Apache pilots ever assigned to a leadership position in active combat operations. Graduation from Apache training was a bittersweet moment for Sarah. Of the original 30 candidates, only 8 had completed the program successfully. She stood with her classmates as they received their wings, but her mind was already focused on the assignment orders that would determine her next chapter. Captain Martinez, Colonel Morrison called her name during the private assignment briefing. Sarah had been promoted to captain upon graduation, a recognition of her exceptional performance throughout training. You're being assigned to the 1st Attack Battalion, 227th Aviation Regiment. They're deploying to Afghanistan in 6 weeks. Sarah felt her heart race. Afghanistan meant combat operations, real missions where her decisions would have life and death consequences. What will be my position within the battalion, sir? Morrison smiled slightly. You're going to be a flight leader initially, commanding a section of 2 Apache helicopters. However, the battalion commander has specifically requested you based on your training performance. There may be additional opportunities for advancement. 6 weeks later, Sarah found herself at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, surrounded by the organized chaos of a forward operating base. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with mountains rising like jagged teeth against the cloudless sky. Apache helicopters sat on the flight line like sleeping predators, ready to launch at a moment's notice. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson, the battalion commander, was a veteran pilot with multiple combat deployments. He met Sarah personally upon her arrival, which was unusual for a new captain. I've read your training reports, he said. Exceptional doesn't begin to describe them. I'm putting you with Alpha Company. They've lost 2 experienced pilots in the last month, and they need someone who can step up quickly. Alpha Company was commanded by Major Brooks, a tough professional who had been flying Apaches for 8 years. She looked at Sarah with the skeptical eye of someone who had seen too many promising young officers fail when faced with real combat pressure. You may have impressed the instructors at Rucker, Brooks said bluntly, but this is different. Out here, mistakes kill people. I need to know you can handle the pressure before I trust you with my soldiers' lives. Sarah understood the major's position completely. Trust in combat had to be earned through demonstrated competence under fire. I'm ready to prove myself, ma'am. Just give me the opportunity. Sarah's first combat mission came 3 days later. Intelligence had identified a Taliban compound where a high-value target was meeting with local commanders. The mission was complex, requiring precise coordination between ground forces, Apache helicopters, and fixed-wing aircraft. Sarah served as wingman to Captain Rodriguez, an experienced pilot who would evaluate her performance. As they approached the target area, Sarah felt the same calm focus that had carried her through training, but now the stakes were real. All stations, this is Dagger 6, came the voice of the ground commander. We're taking heavy fire from the compound. Need immediate air support on the eastern wall. Rodriguez engaged the first target while Sarah maintained overwatch, scanning for additional threats. Through her targeting system, she identified enemy fighters moving to flank the ground troops. Dagger 6, this is Apache 2-6, Sarah transmitted. I have enemy personnel attempting to flank your position from the north. Request permission to engage. 2-6, you are cleared hot on the northern position. Sarah's first combat engagement was textbook perfect. Her Hellfire missile eliminated the threat with surgical precision, preventing the enemy from gaining a tactical advantage. But what impressed Rodriguez more was Sarah's composure under fire and her ability to see the larger tactical picture while managing her own aircraft. Over the following weeks, Sarah flew mission after mission, steadily building a reputation for exceptional skill and reliable judgment. Her fellow pilots began seeking her input on complex tactical problems. Ground commanders specifically requested her aircraft for their most challenging operations. The turning point came during a mission that started as routine surveillance, but quickly escalated into one of the most intense combat operations of the deployment. Sarah was flying as mission commander for a 4-ship formation when they received an urgent call for assistance. Any station, this is Outpost 7, came the desperate radio call. We are under attack by approximately 50 enemy fighters. We have wounded and are running low on ammunition. Request immediate assistance. The outpost was located in a narrow valley surrounded by high mountains, making it extremely difficult to approach safely. Previous rescue attempts had been driven off by intense anti-aircraft fire. Sarah studied the situation quickly and realized that conventional tactics wouldn't work. All Apache elements, this is Devil 6, Sarah transmitted, using her mission commander call sign. We're going to approach from the east through the river valley. Single file formation, maintain low altitude to avoid radar detection. The approach was harrowing. Sarah led her formation through a winding canyon, barely wide enough for the helicopters, with mountains rising thousands of feet on both sides. One navigation error or mechanical problem would be catastrophic. As they emerged from the canyon, Sarah could see the outpost under siege. Enemy fighters had surrounded the small base and were closing in for a final assault. The situation was desperate, with American soldiers fighting for their lives. Devil Flight, we're going to make multiple attack runs, Sarah ordered. Focus on the enemy positions closest to the outpost first. Watch for friendly forces and be careful with your targeting. What followed was a masterclass in combat aviation. Sarah coordinated her 4 aircraft like a conductor leading an orchestra, timing their attacks to maximize effectiveness while minimizing risk to friendly forces. She personally destroyed several enemy positions while simultaneously directing the other aircraft and coordinating with ground troops. The battle lasted nearly 2 hours. When it was over, the outpost was secure. 53 enemy fighters had been eliminated and every American soldier had survived. Sarah had led one of the most successful close air support missions of the entire war. Colonel Davidson was waiting when the flight returned to base. I just got off the phone with the Outpost 7 commander, he told Sarah. He said you saved 42 American lives today. That's the kind of leadership this battalion needs. 3 weeks later, Sarah received unexpected news. Major Brooks was being reassigned to a staff position, and Davidson was promoting Sarah to company commander. At 24 years old, she would become one of the youngest Apache company commanders in military history. I know this is fast, Davidson told her privately, but you've proven yourself under the most difficult circumstances. The soldiers trust you, the other pilots respect you, and I need someone who can lead from the front. As Sarah prepared to take command of Alpha Company, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a recruitment office in Phoenix to commanding combat operations in Afghanistan. She thought about her father, about the dreams he had shared with her about flying and freedom and responsibility. But she had no idea that her greatest challenge was still ahead, and that a simple tattoo on her shoulder would soon become the key to proving herself to people who had never imagined that the quiet young woman they occasionally glimpsed could be the Apache Squadron leader who had become legendary among combat pilots. Command of Alpha Company brought new challenges that tested Sarah in ways she hadn't anticipated. Leading 12 Apache helicopters and 36 crew members required different skills than flying individual missions. She had to balance operational demands with the personal welfare of her pilots, many of whom were older and more experienced than she was. Captain Williams, her new executive officer, was initially skeptical about serving under such a young commander. He had been passed over for company command twice and didn't hide his resentment about Sarah's rapid promotion. During their first staff meeting, his attitude was barely professional. "Ma'am, with respect, some of the senior pilots are concerned about the change in leadership," Williams said. "They're wondering if you have enough experience for this level of responsibility." Sarah studied Williams carefully. She understood his position and the delicate politics of military leadership. "Captain, I appreciate your honesty. Let me ask you something. Do you think the soldiers at Outpost 7 cared about my age when we pulled them out of that firefight?" Williams was quiet for a moment. He had heard about the rescue mission, but he was struggling to reconcile the legendary Apache pilot with the young woman sitting across from him. "No, ma'am. I suppose they didn't. Experience matters," Sarah continued. "But judgment matters more. I'm not asking anyone to follow me because of my rank. I'm asking them to judge me by my actions. Can you do that?" Over the following weeks, Sarah proved herself through consistent performance and genuine concern for her soldiers. She flew the most dangerous missions herself, never asking her pilots to take risks she wouldn't accept. She spent time with the maintenance crews, understanding the challenges they faced keeping the aircraft operational. She knew the names of every soldier in her company and details about their families back home. The real test of her leadership came during Operation Mountain Strike, a complex offensive designed to clear Taliban forces from a strategic valley. Alpha Company would provide air support for 3 days of continuous ground operations, requiring precise coordination and sustained combat operations. On the second day of the operation, Sarah received intelligence that changed everything. A group of American Special Operations soldiers had been cut off behind enemy lines during a reconnaissance mission. They were trapped in a cave system with wounded personnel and limited ammunition. Enemy forces were closing in on their position. The rescue mission was deemed too dangerous by higher command. The soldiers were located in terrain that made helicopter operations nearly impossible, surrounded by heavy anti-aircraft weapons. Previous attempts to reach them had failed, with 2 aircraft damaged and forced to abort their missions. Sarah studied the intelligence reports and terrain analysis in her command tent. The trapped soldiers belonged to her brother Miguel's unit. He had joined the Army 2 years after Sarah and was now serving as a special operations medic. The personal connection made the mission even more crucial, but Sarah couldn't let emotion cloud her judgment. "We can reach them," Sarah told Colonel Davidson during a heated planning session. "It requires a different approach than what's been tried before. 4 aircraft, night operations, approach from the mountainside where they won't expect us." Davidson shook his head. "I can't authorize that mission, Sarah. We've already lost too many aircraft trying to reach that position. I won't sacrifice more soldiers for a rescue that might not be possible." Sarah understood the colonel's position, but she also understood something he didn't. Those soldiers were running out of time, and conventional rescue methods wouldn't work. Sometimes leadership meant taking calculated risks that others weren't willing to accept. That night, Sarah made a decision that would define her career. She assembled 4 volunteer crews for an unauthorized rescue mission. Every pilot understood the risks and the potential consequences if the mission failed. "We're not just rescuing soldiers," Sarah told her volunteer crews. "We're proving that we never leave anyone behind, no matter how difficult the circumstances." The night rescue mission was everything Sarah had anticipated and worse. Flying through mountain valleys in complete darkness, navigating by instruments alone, avoiding radar detection while approaching a heavily defended position. But Sarah's planning and her crew's exceptional skill made the impossible seem routine. They reached the trapped soldiers just as enemy forces were preparing a final assault on their position. Sarah's Apache engaged the surrounding enemy positions, while the other aircraft provided cover and extracted the wounded soldiers. Miguel was among the rescued, unconscious from blood loss but alive. The unauthorized mission succeeded completely, but Sarah knew there would be consequences. She had disobeyed direct orders and risked multiple aircraft on her own authority. When they returned to base, Colonel Davidson was waiting with military police. "Captain Martinez, you are under arrest for disobeying direct orders and unauthorized use of military aircraft," Davidson announced formally. But even as he spoke, Sarah could see the conflict in his eyes. The mission had saved American lives, But military discipline required consequences for insubordination. The court-martial proceedings that followed became a sensation within military circles. Sarah's defense attorney argued that exceptional circumstances justified her actions. Witnesses testified about her exemplary record, her tactical brilliance, and the lives she had saved throughout her deployment. But the most compelling testimony came from the soldiers she had rescued. Miguel recovered from his wounds, spoke about the leadership and courage required to attempt a mission that everyone else had deemed impossible. "My sister didn't rescue us because we're family," Miguel said during his testimony. "She rescued us because that's who she is. She's the kind of leader who would risk everything to bring her soldiers home." The court-martial panel deliberated for 6 hours before reaching their verdict. Sarah was found guilty of disobeying orders but was sentenced only to a formal reprimand. More importantly, she was recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for her exceptional heroism during combat operations. However, the controversy surrounding the unauthorized mission meant that Sarah's military career was effectively over. She could continue serving, but advancement opportunities would be limited. Rather than accept a diminished role, Sarah submitted her resignation from the Army. On her last day in Afghanistan, Sarah walked through the Alpha Company area one final time. Her pilots had organized an informal ceremony, presenting her with a squadron patch that read Devil 6, her mission commander call sign that had become legendary among Apache pilots. "You're the best commander we've ever served under," Captain Williams told her. Williams had become one of Sarah's strongest supporters after witnessing her leadership firsthand. "What you did changed how we think about what's possible." As Sarah prepared to leave military service, she had no idea that her reputation had spread far beyond Afghanistan. Stories about the young Apache pilot who had defied orders to save American lives circulated through military communities worldwide. She had become a symbol of the kind of leadership that inspired others to extraordinary achievements. But Sarah Martinez was about to discover that leaving the military didn't mean leaving behind the identity she had forged in the crucible of combat. The skills, experience, and reputation she had built would soon be tested in an entirely different environment. 2 years after leaving the military, Sarah found herself in an unexpected situation. She was working as a civilian helicopter pilot for a medical transport company in Colorado, flying critically injured patients from remote areas to major hospitals. The work was meaningful but quiet, a stark contrast to her combat experience. On a Tuesday morning in September, Sarah was grabbing coffee at a small cafe near the Denver airport when she overheard a conversation at the next table that stopped her cold. 3 men in expensive suits were discussing a helicopter accident that had occurred during a corporate executive retreat in the mountains. "The pilot lost control in a crosswind," one man was saying. "Killed everyone on board, including our CEO and 2 board members. The FAA investigation is ongoing, but our insurance company is claiming pilot error." Sarah recognized the men as executives from Apex Industries, a major defense contractor she had heard about during her military service. Their company had been involved in several high-profile aviation incidents over the past year, raising questions about their safety standards and pilot training programs. "We need to find someone who can review the accident investigation," another executive said. "Someone with real helicopter experience who can identify what actually went wrong. The insurance claim is worth $40 million. Without fully understanding why, Sarah approached their table. "Excuse me," she said quietly. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. I'm a helicopter pilot with accident investigation experience. Perhaps I could help?" The 3 men looked at Sarah with barely concealed skepticism. She was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Nothing about her appearance suggested the kind of expertise they needed for a multi-million-dollar investigation. "What kind of experience do you have?" asked the older man, who introduced himself as Robert Chen, the company's new interim CEO. "I'm licensed in multiple helicopter types, including military aircraft," Sarah replied. "I've investigated several aircraft accidents and have extensive experience flying in challenging conditions." Chen exchanged glances with his colleagues. They clearly weren't impressed, but they were also desperate for help. "Do you have any references we could contact?" "This is a significant responsibility," Sarah hesitated. Her military service was a matter of public record, but she rarely discussed her combat experience with civilians. Most people couldn't relate to that world. and she had learned that her Apache background sometimes made others uncomfortable. "I can provide military references," she said carefully. "I served as a helicopter pilot in Afghanistan." The men's attitudes shifted slightly. Military service carried weight in the defense industry, but they still seemed uncertain about trusting such a critical investigation to someone they had just met in a coffee shop. "Tell you what," Chen said finally, "we'll pay you as a consultant to review the preliminary investigation. If your analysis is valuable, we can discuss a larger role." 3 days later, Sarah found herself at the accident site in the Colorado mountains, examining the wreckage of the crashed helicopter. The FAA investigators had completed their initial examination, but Sarah's trained eye immediately noticed details that others had missed. The helicopter had crashed during what should have been a routine flight from a mountain resort to the Denver airport. Weather conditions had been challenging, with strong crosswinds and limited visibility, but nothing that an experienced pilot shouldn't have been able to handle. Sarah spent hours examining the wreckage, photographing critical components and reviewing maintenance records. What she discovered was deeply troubling. The accident hadn't been caused by pilot error at all. A critical hydraulic component had failed due to improper maintenance, causing the pilot to lose control at a crucial moment during the flight. More disturbing was what Sarah found when she investigated further. Apex Industries had been cutting costs on helicopter maintenance for months, using cheaper parts and extending service intervals beyond manufacturer recommendations. The accident was the predictable result of systematic safety failures. When Sarah presented her findings to Chen and the other executives, their reaction was not what she expected. Instead of gratitude for uncovering the truth, they seemed angry that her investigation had revealed the company's liability. "This information cannot become public," Chen told her bluntly. "If it does, Apex Industries could face criminal charges and hundreds of millions in liability. We're prepared to pay you substantial compensation for your discretion." Sarah stared at the men across the conference table, understanding finally why they had hired someone they had just met. They hadn't wanted an honest investigation. They had wanted someone they could control or intimidate. "I can't suppress evidence of safety violations that could prevent future accidents," Sarah said simply. "People died because of negligent maintenance. That information has to be reported." The atmosphere in the room became hostile. "Ms. Martinez," Chen said coldly, "I think you misunderstand your position here. You're a contract employee with no legal standing in this investigation. We own your analysis and we decide what happens with it." That evening, Sarah returned to her hotel room to find it had been searched. Her laptop was missing, along with copies of her investigation files. She realized that Apex Industries was willing to go to extreme lengths to suppress her findings, but they had underestimated who they were dealing with. Sarah had learned in the military to prepare for every contingency. She had stored backup copies of all her evidence in multiple secure locations and had already contacted an attorney who specialized in aviation safety cases. The next morning, Sarah walked into the lobby of Apex Industries wearing a business suit instead of her usual casual clothes. But she had also made one other change. She had pulled her hair back to reveal a tattoo on her right shoulder that she usually kept hidden. The tattoo was small but distinctive, showing the Apache helicopter silhouette with the words Devil 6 underneath. To most people, it would have been meaningless, but to anyone familiar with military aviation, it identified her as the legendary Apache Squadron leader, whose exploits in Afghanistan had become the stuff of legend. When Sarah requested a meeting with Chen, his assistant initially tried to dismiss her. But another executive, a former Army officer named Thompson, noticed the tattoo and stopped in his tracks. "Are you Devil 6? Thompson asked with obvious shock. "The Apache pilot from Afghanistan?" Sarah nodded simply. "I am." Word spread through the company's executive offices like wildfire. Within minutes, Sarah found herself in a room full of executives who suddenly understood exactly who they had been trying to intimidate. Several were military veterans who knew her reputation. Others were aviation industry professionals who had heard stories about her exceptional skill and uncompromising integrity. "Ms. Martinez," Chen said. His tone completely changed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We greatly value your expertise and would never want to suppress a legitimate safety investigation." But Sarah had already made her decision. That afternoon, she submitted her complete findings to the FAA. the National Transportation Safety Board, and the media. The resulting investigation revealed systemic safety failures throughout Apex Industries and led to criminal charges against several executives. More importantly, Sarah's actions prevented future accidents by exposing dangerous cost-cutting practices that other companies were also using. Her investigation became a case study in aviation safety and corporate accountability. 6 months later, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from the Federal Aviation Administration. They offered her a position as a senior accident investigator, leading teams responsible for investigating the most complex aviation accidents in the country. We need someone with your combination of technical expertise and uncompromising integrity, the FAA administrator told her. Someone who can't be intimidated or bought, who puts safety above everything else. As Sarah accepted the position, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from a recruitment office in Phoenix to becoming one of the most respected aviation safety experts in the country. She thought about her father, about the values he had taught her, and about the responsibility that came with the skills and experience she had gained. Her Apache Squadron leader tattoo had become a symbol of something larger than military service. It represented the kind of leadership that put principles above personal gain, that protected others regardless of the personal cost, and that never compromised on matters of life and death. Sarah Martinez had proven that true leadership isn't about rank or position. It's about the courage to do what's right, even when no one thinks you have the authority or capability to make a difference. And sometimes it takes a simple tattoo to remind the world that heroes come in forms they never expected.